My name is Lucas and I'm 16. I live in Pennsylvania near the Appalachian Mountain Range. As a kid growing up, we would always go up to my uncle's cabin in the mountains that we also hunted at. There's a long driveway leading up to the cabin, and a big parking area with a spotlight looking down on it. It was in late November, and the night before the day the whitetail buck season, so we had our regular get-together at the cabin. There was a lot of drinking going on, so I kind of distanced myself from all of it and went outside to take a smoke break. And as I walked outside, I would never forget the sound I heard. It was a mix between an animal in distress and almost a creepy laugh. I am easily scared and quickly went back inside. After a while, the others went to sleep and it was just me still awake. I suffer from sleep insomnia, and my mind races all night. I was thinking about something random, when all of a sudden I hear the same noise I had heard before, and was very disturbed. I eventually fell asleep and woke up the next morning, ready to go hunting. We got done hunting and I forgot all about it by that evening after supper. Night comes along again, and once again, the older people I was with were slamming beers back, so I just played on my phone. One of the guys went out for a smoke break and didn't come back for a while, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, so my dad told me to go check on him. As I walked outside, I saw him standing next to my dad's car and yelled, "Hey, we were wondering where you went off to." As I walked outside, I saw him standing next to my dad's car and yelled, "Hey, we were wondering where you went off to." But then I nearly crapped myself, as I heard a voice behind me say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking for my playing cards in my truck." I turned around to see him walking towards me, and as I looked back at my dad's car, there was no one. I didn't want to look like an idiot in front of anyone else, so I mentioned it only to my dad. He told me I must have seen the shadow of a tree or something. He is a Christian and refuses to believe in anything that's like paranormal. So the next morning, we hear a shot ring out and come to find out my uncle was shot a deer. We help him collect and clean it and hang it up so we can butcher it. They then all celebrated by drinking more beer and I was once again left out. It was around 4 p.m. now, so we were about to eat the deer my uncle had shot, when my uncle said something. He said, "That's funny. I could have sworn I put the chops over the grill to cook," but shook it off as being a coyote or something. So we ate our supper, and once again, it was nighttime, and we were all getting ready to go to bed again. Again, I couldn't sleep, so I sat up on my phone and played games. I forgot to mention that whenever my uncle shoots a deer, he throws all the guts into a pit we call the feeding trough, as there are a lot of coyotes in the area, just a way of giving back to the wildlife, I guess. Anyway, I was laying up in bed when I heard that same noise again. It sounded farther away and I wasn't worried about going and taking a look outside to maybe try and put an image to the strange and creepy noise I was hearing. So I looked out the front door and I saw it. It was on all fours eating the guts out of the feeding trough, and I thought it was a coyote at first. But then it stood up, and it was looking straight at me. I couldn't see its face, but I could see shadows from the top of its head, which I perceived to be horns maybe. I didn't even bother moving a muscle, way too afraid it would come charging at the door. It stared at the cabin for just a few minutes, and then it got down and trotted off and just disappeared. I told my dad what happened the next morning, and again he denied it was anything. He just thought that I was going crazy or something. Luckily, that was the last night I was staying there. The next day I went online to Google anything that had any similarities to what I saw. I guess it could have been a skinwalker a Wendigo, but I was never able to put a name to it. It still creeps me out to this day. And even though my uncle has sold that cabin since, I will never step foot in those mountains again. I'm still scared to even look at my window at night. I just never want to see anything like that ever again.
Back in 2008, I was on a hunting trip with my brother up near the Canadian-Michigan border. We had rented a cabin for the week and were looking forward to a nice quiet week until this monster spoiled it all. One night, after a day being in the woods, We were tired and didn't feel like cooking us a meal. So I decided to jump in my truck, drive into town, and get some pop and grub while my brother stayed back to wash up. So I drove down into town by myself and was probably about 45 minutes away. Probably not even a solid hour. I talked with the gal at the counter for a few, but I wanted to get back to feed my brother since he gets grouchy when he doesn't have his food, and I didn't want him hacking on me. By the time I headed back, it was getting dark, and by the time I reached the cabin, the sun had already gone down all the way. I hit the road leading to the cabin and could see the silhouette of something big looking into one of the cabin's windows. At first, I thought it was Everett, since it looked like it was standing on two legs, but this thing looked to be too tall. So then I thought to myself, well, maybe then it's a bear. I didn't want no bear coming around the cabin and causing trouble, so I decided to try to scare him off with my headlights. I aimed my truck in his direction and flipped on my high beams. What I saw then wasn't a bear, it was a monster. When my lights hit it, it spun around and I saw the whole thing. It was only standing on two legs. Now, you wanted my description of this thing, and I wish I had my camera handy so I could just take a picture and give it to you, but I wasn't expecting to see any type of monster out there. He was a big guy, like Harry from Harry and the Hendersons, but it wasn't any Sasquatch I was looking at. It looked more like a werewolf. He was more than 7 feet tall, based on how high his head was above the window. He was brown, like a chocolate lab, but the coat was different. It was shaggy like a wolf and had lighter spots on the chest and legs. He had big muscles like he went to the gym. His chest was really wide and his shoulders so looked like Brock Lesnar. He had arms that looked like they could kill you easily, and these long-fingered hands with big nails at the ends, and his neck was thick as my waist almost. Even with all that power in his body, that ain't what scared me the most. It was his face. He looked like he was madder than hell about something. Maybe because I interrupted him. Maybe that was just his attitude all the time. Who knows? But those eyes, they will haunt me all of my days. I believe in good and evil, and this thing was pure evil. The light reflected off his eyes like a night predator, and the rest of his face looked just like a wolf. Snout, teeth, nose, ears, all of it looked just like a wolf. When this thing spun around to face me, it pivoted on his back 2 legs and turned as like a human would. First he turned his waist to look at me, then pivoted to face me entirely. My body went numb, and I started to shake. What in the hell is this thing? A werewolf? The only thing I could think of was that it was trying to get to my brother, and he didn't have any idea that this thing was out there. So I started honking my horn and flashing my lights at it, trying to drive it off. Then, that thing put its hands over its eyes, just like a person. It gnashed his teeth at me, and then ran off into the woods. It was still on his hind legs the entire time. I pulled right the hell up to the cabin as close as I could, grabbed my mag light, and took off for the door. I left the truck running, and I was calling out to my brother like a crazed man. Everett ran into the living room, yelling at me, asking what the hell I was doing, and I told him something was out there and we had to leave. Luckily, my brother's a trusting man. 43 years of living with me, he should know when I'm serious. So we grabbed our rifles and mag lights and we took out of there with great haste. As we ran to the truck, we could both hear something big running in the woods next to the cabin, and the loudest growl I've ever heard. The growl almost shook my insides. We tossed the gun into the truck and jumped in. Everett was shining his light into the forest, but he didn't see anything. Then we took off out of there. On the way back into town, I told my brother what he had seen, and he just shook his head. I think he was letting it soak in. He looked at me and said, "Arn, I think you saw yourself a werewolf." I looked up at the sky, and it wasn't a full moon. So I don't know if that was right. I don't know what we saw that night. We went back during the day a few days later. After going to church, I might add, and praying a lot. We got our stuff and then talked to the gentleman that rented us the cabin and told him what I seen. He swore he never heard of anything like that around there before, but I got the impression he was lying to us. That's why I never really go into the woods unarmed anymore.
I'm a 36-year-old female and have lived with this memory most of my life. I hope to end the nightmares behind it by sharing my story. It begins when I was 13 years old in a small town of only 6,000 people. I lived in a cul-de-sac at the time, and this made my life easier in many ways. Everyone knew everyone in town, and in many ways, that made me feel safer. I was told never to go 4 houses away from my own, and never to go to the woods. Thankfully, my friends would always come by and visit me. We'll call my friends Michael, Shelley, and Connie. My friend would come down every day to ride bikes and hang out. On this particular day, we got it in our minds to check out the woods across from my property, as we'd explored almost everywhere else around the neighborhood. We built a really cool fort and would take turns sharing ownership of the fort day by day. To get to the fort, you needed to cross a stream, but swinging across a vine that led to many a mishap. On the day in question, we had 2 boys, Craig and Daniel, join us in the woods. Growing wary of our limited imaginations, as they put it, Craig 13 and Daniel was 15, decided we should explore deeper in the woods. Being 15, Daniel made himself the leader of the group. Fearing being left behind, my friends and I joined the other 2 boys through the thicket of trees that previously blocked us from going deeper. Daniel, who was friends with my older brother, assured us he'd keep us safe. Exploring deeper into the woods, Daniel soon called out that he saw something ahead of us. Intrigued, we continued down our path until we came across a cabin. The cabin looked abandoned, old, and had me quite intrigued. After knocking a few times on the door to make sure no one was around, Daniel began trying to knock the door in. I, however, was getting restless and went around on a path through the corner of the shack. I was about halfway down the path when I heard the front door give in and my friends cheering at their success. I shook this off and continued running down the path, and my foot caught something solid and unmoving that sent me face first into the dirt. Sitting up, I nursed a piece of wood. It seemed to lead to a potential hidden area, which I was all too anxious to discover. Getting up, I cleared the leaves out of the way and found a hidden door. I figured this must lead to a basement level in the cabin of some kind, and called to my friends to come over. Daniel and Shelley were the only 2 to appear, but I figured I was in safe hands, as Daniel was afraid of my brother, and Shelley was my closest female friend. Together we got the handle and lizarded the hatch into the pit below. It looked like an abyss of despair, but I wanted to know where it led. Daniel stopped before going in, insisting he go first for our safety. I wanted to argue, but Shelley smartly informed me if something happened to him, we'd have a chance to escape. Daniel further insisted by saying if anything happened to me, my brother would murder him. Seconds later, Daniel was down the stairs and shouting we should see something. I rushed down the stairs to see what he spoke of, but I was overcome by a malicious, sinister sort of feeling. I couldn't place what, but something was definitely wrong with this basement area. Daniel pulled out a flashlight and continued exploring. I slapped him in the arm and told him that he had been here before with an accusatory tone. He looked away, asking what it mattered when I felt myself growing angrier. I told him he could have at least told us he'd been in the area before, and what to expect as the place smelled of must, rot, and dead animals. Daniel pressed forward as I began scanning my surroundings some more. I had taken maybe 5 steps when I heard something that sent the hairs on the back of my neck screaming into my scalp. Danny looked like a statue now. Frozen, in place. When I asked him if he was okay, he stiffened, but he said nothing, at which point I felt even more afraid. Danny mumbled something I couldn't understand, and before I knew it, he was on top of me and shoving me towards the stairs. He yelled for me to go, get out! But I was confused. Daniel scrambled up past me, and I thought I was done for till he grabbed my hand and yanked me out of the hole. As I turned to head out, I could hear laughter echoing below. Daniel helped me up, and we ran as we all screamed for the others. Everyone joined us out front when Daniel yelled, "He's here, run!" Craig didn't hesitate to run, but the rest of my friends looked around in confusion. I knew at this point, Craig was not shoving us along, and Daniel had encountered what was here before. It angered me to think that they'd bring us here, knowing it could be dangerous, but I had little time to dwell on it as we continued running through the woods. Behind us, close by, we could hear that evil laughter echoing once again. This made everyone freeze in their tracks. Shelley and Connie began crying while Craig shouted no, and I pressed Shelley and Connie forward. Something or someone was pursuing us, and we couldn't stop moving. We had to make it home. We rushed over and down a hill when my foot caught a molehill, and I went tumbling downwards towards the bottom. Landing at the bottom, I winced in pain as my ankle was messed up. I kept praying this wasn't the end, and I wasn't going to die here as I cried for someone to assist me. Daniel and Craig scooped me up and continued running as they carried me. We were getting ready to navigate the stream when I heard a familiar voice, and I shouted, "Dad!" My dad and brother appeared and carried me while the other parents showed up to help their other kids. I was crying as I was being carried from both the pain and from the fear of whatever had chased us. Daniel was about to explain what happened when we all heard a scream from the woods. The scream echoed through the woods, and my dad shook his head and said never again. One by one, our parents escorted us all home as we were left in dismay, while they all explained we were never to go near the woods again. I eventually was home safely, confused but otherwise okay. I never got answers as to what that was in the basement or what it wanted. I've been left with more questions than answers, and every day without an answer just makes my curiosity grow. I'll always be left wondering what was in there that gave the chase. Also, why?
I'm a 21-year-old woman, and this happened to me in the summer of 2012 when I was a 13-year-old girl. My mom, my sisters, her 2 daughters, and I went on a road trip to Sweden from Normandy. We booked a cabin a few hours from the border that wasn't exactly huge. There were around 20 cabins there, one big white house, and the main building. When we arrived, we got the keys to the cabin, only to realize the place had a bunch of dog hair in it. My sister and I are allergic. And so my sister came with me to get the keys to the White House. Soon after, we went shopping, and when we got back, we had a barbecue while playing volleyball together. I had a hard time focusing as I kept feeling like someone was watching us. I looked to the second floor, but saw nothing. My sister also looked there before it got cold, at which point we all went inside, sat around the table, and played cards. I once again felt someone was watching us. Looking down the hallway, I saw nothing. Soon after, we grew tired and decided to go to bed. My mom shared a room with me on the second floor while my sister and her daughters were in a room below us, on the first floor. Falling asleep quickly, we were awoken 20 minutes later to the sound of my mom's phone going off. It was my sister asking us to stop making so much noise. We informed her we hadn't, and we were sleeping when she called us. Later that night, after falling asleep, I woke up again, but this time I saw an old woman in a white dress staring at me, gazing into my eyes. The woman had curly hair and wore glasses. I didn't think much of this as I assumed I was dreaming, so I closed my eyes again. Before I knew it, my mom's alarm was going off, as it was time to get up now. My mom got up and took a shower, while I ran downstairs crying. You know that feeling you get, where you gotta get upstairs or into bed or else someone is gonna kill you? That's the feeling I had going downstairs to my sister. I helped make breakfast until my mom returned from the shower. During breakfast, the oldest girl said she didn't wish to stay here anymore, but she wouldn't say why. I told my mom we needed to go to the main building and explain everything that happened last night. When we arrived, the receptionist smiled, asked us if we slept all right. My mom said what happened, at which point the receptionist stopped smiling. The receptionist informed us that we were the 4th group in a week to speak about the old woman and strange goings-on in the building. The woman then explained she never goes alone to clean the building, as the White House was the main house on a farm that burned completely down around the house. Everyone who lived on the farm died. We soon changed cabins for the final night, and were informed we didn't need to pay because of the events of the previous night. When we arrived at our new cabin, one of the daughters needed to use the restroom, but didn't want to go alone. I informed her not to lock the door and I'd be right outside. Once she finished, we went to open the door, but it wouldn't open. The air suddenly grew cold, and we started to panic. Once the door did open, we left, got a new cabin, and went for a walk. Later, after we went to sleep for the night, the oldest daughter said goodnight, Olga. My mom asked who Olga was, at which point the daughter answered, "It's the lady. She's here." The next morning we left at about 6 in the morning. We passed a large white house to find a new family that stayed there standing on the lawn. One of them was pointed to the second floor window. It was the same window we'd stared at the first night we stayed there. The one we first saw the lady in white in. My father, mother, and I make frequent trips to the Smoky Mountains and stay in the cabins they have near Pigeon Forge. However, this particular trip still haunts me to this day. About 8 years ago, we stayed in a cabin that had an alarm system. It was already dark outside when we reached the cabin and got settled in. We set the alarm and thought we would watch a movie together. While we were watching the movie, the security system alarm went off. The alarm was only to go off if a door was open. We checked the cabin top to bottom and find nothing out of the ordinary. The next morning, we called the company and rented the cabin to us to see if maybe the alarm system was broken and to have it checked out. Someone came and checked out the system and said that he has been called out to our cabin multiple times within the past month with the same problem. Since it's only the first day at the cabin, I am already feeling a little creeped out. I notice that there is a book on the table that guests can sign and talk about how much they love the cabin. As I was reading more and more stories, I noticed that many of them mention feeling unsafe. Some even mention that they found wet footprints on the back deck, where the hot tub is. I told my family about these stories, and they told me they are just trying to tell scary stories and get other guests spooked. I agree with her and go about our day. The same night, we go to bed like normal. My father slept in the basement of the cabin. I slept on the main floor beside the kitchen, and my mother slept on the top floor. My dad snores so loud that we all sleep far away from each other, including my mom. It was about 2 a.m. in the morning when I am awoken by the fridge door closing. I looked at the bright light from the fridge that was pouring into my room from the crack underneath my closed door. I noticed that the light would come and go as the fridge door seemed to continue to open and close. I assume it was one of my parents leaning on the fridge door trying to decide what they wanted to eat for a late night snack. However, I felt a weird sensation. I just don't know. I didn't even consider to get out of my bed to join in on the snack glow. The fridge light disappeared slowly, and I heard footsteps walk away from my bedroom and head in the direction of the steps to go up to my mom's room. The footsteps seemed to stop for a second, then start back up the stairs again. All of a sudden they stop. I assumed that it was my mother and she made it to her room, so I fell back asleep. The next morning I wake up to go directly to my mom and ask what she decided to eat last night. She looked at me and asked, "What?" I told her that I thought she was at the fridge last night opening and closing the fridge because I heard her go back upstairs after a while at around 2 a.m. She looked at me and said, "I thought that was you. At this time in my life, I was known to be up at that time. I saw you standing at top of the stairs last night around that time. I assumed you were sleepwalking because you looked at me and went back downstairs." So at this point, I start to freak out and become sick to my stomach. The rest of the trip, I slept with my mother at the very top floor. I didn't experience anything else like that for the rest of the trip, and never went anywhere alone. A couple months go by after our trip and my dad tells me he was looking to rent another cabin for a trip. We went to go look at the cabin that we rented out last time and found out that they had closed that cabin and it is no longer available to rent. Out of curiosity, he did some research to find out that many guests experienced something in that cabin. The complaints ranged from feeling unsafe to people thinking someone was in the cabin that shouldn't have been, to people leaving before their vacation was over. I am not sure what my mother and I had experienced that night in the cabin, but I now know that we aren't the only ones that went through something similar.
This story I'm about to tell took place 2 to 3 years ago when a group of friends and I went camping in a forest behind one of their houses. It is easily one of the most terrifying moments of my life thus far. We walked 6 miles till we found an old wooden log cabin, which we chose to sleep in for the night. The first sign we should have left was that the place seemed fairly well maintained considering how old it was. Being dumb teenagers, we thought it was cool our friend had a cabin of his own, but it was actually someone else's. It's about 9 or 10 at night, and we'd been drinking and doing pot when one of our buddies turned, looking at a window before turning pale. Noticing this, we asked him what was wrong, at which point he informed us he saw someone out the window. Thinking he was just drunk and high, we told him to relax. Soon after, we all headed to bed. It was late in the night when I awoke to the sight of the door unlocking and someone walking into the cabin. I initially thought it was one of the guys till I looked around and noticed everyone was still inside the cabin. Another one of my friends noticed the guy too as he tried to suppress a squeal of fear, and I bit my tongue, trying to not make a noise myself. This dude comes over and starts stroking our hair, before going to a corner and wanking it while staring at us. I wanted to run, but I was paralyzed by fear. A few minutes later, the guy walks over and stares at us before leaving the cabin. Exhausted from fear and adrenaline overload, I crashed. The next morning I asked if anyone else witnessed it, and everyone had except for the guy who slept in the bed, who, lucky him, slept through everything. We grabbed our stuff and left immediately. While running off, we noticed the man from the night before, and one of my friends screamed in surprise and fear. The man looked to be in his 50s or 60s with gray hair and torn jeans. We continued running till we made it back to our friend's house. Never told anyone what happened until now, and I kind of regret that. If you are ever in the woods and see a cabin, I'd recommend not making assumptions and staying the night, but if you should, maybe bring a weapon to be safe. We didn't, and things could have turned out a lot worse.